All right, Kevin Polky, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring you on because not only are you connected to Northern Illinois in many different components, you have a history with the sport of wrestling. You know tons of people who are involved in wrestling and have been involved in wrestling. So I wanted to bring you on and talk about some things that I think that the area's wrestling community could benefit from, just exposing them to an idea that you and I talk about. I mean, all the time.
Yeah.
Every time we get together, we kind of repeat ourselves.
Yeah.
But first, just kind of jump into who you are, what you do, and your connection with wrestling in this area.
Yeah. Well, Dalton, as always, thank you for having me on the show. And obviously, I'm a huge fan of wrestling sports in general, but wrestling because I have my own experience growing up as a young person. I wrestled in middle school and early high school, and decided that when I went from 138 pounds and started bodybuilding to 205 pounds the following year, that I didn't want to wrestle heavyweight or 185. So I focused just on football and bodybuilding at that time. But my my enjoyment and love for wrestling and respect for the sport, and what it can do for young people has goes all the way back to when I was in middle school and experiencing it for myself. What I do now, is no longer being a competitive athlete. Uh, I have been an addiction counselor, a school social worker. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been a personal trainer in the past, as well as doing executive coaching and life coaching. I run a couple counseling agencies. I founded KP Counseling out of Rockford, and I also run some organizations up in counseling centers up in the Wisconsin area. I also have Four Corners Wellness Center, which is an education, um, executive coaching, business consulting that I do as well. And it really, I'm developing that into a little bit bigger project, looking at more of a lifestyle more so than just teaching. And then probably the latest thing that I've done, which has now been 6+ years, is I have a suicide prevention program called Shatter Our Silence. I started that in 2016, and that was as a result of my son graduated from Rockford Christian, which is a small high school here in the Northern Illinois area, about 100 kids in the class. And unfortunately, three of those 100 of his class died from suicide within less than 4 years. And as a result of that, I started a nonprofit called Shatter Our Silence. So those are the things that I primarily do. I continue to work out. It's part of my lifestyle, part of my life on a daily basis. And so when I get to watch competitive sports, regardless of what the sports are, I have an appreciation for what athletes go through.
That's great. And just remind me, where did you went where did you go to high school?
Yeah, I graduated, went to Harlem, originally born in Rockford. And then when I was in grade school, we moved out to McChesney Park, or what later became McChesney Park, and then graduated from Harlem in 1986.
Got you. And so, you and I met, I think the year that I was coaching at Rockford Boylan. We ran into each other a couple times in Peak Fitness, I remember. And there was a mutual friend, John Borelli, and then we kind of just talked from there. But we got together multiple occasions and we started talking about, ideas, spirituality, philosophy, things that I've always gravitated towards a specific interest with. But not long after, you introduced me to a movie called Finding Joe that exposed me to Joseph Campbell and his work on the hero's journey. So I wanted to really start talking about the hero's journey and Joseph Campbell's work, but also how it kind of pertains to wrestling. But first, can you kind of like I don't know if you want just summarize or communicate what you know about Joseph Campbell and that hero's journey?
Yeah. So it's interesting. You're right. So the hero's journey for me has been one of those things that throughout my life, throughout my career, it has re uh, reoccurred multiple times, and probably by no accident, and I'll get into that in a minute. But I was first introduced to Campbell's work. Joseph Campbell was he had a strong attraction initially to Native American myth and stories and legends, and then later took that and went across all the different myths and stories of different cultures over different times, and he found that there was a common theme through all these different stories and myths and fairy tales, and what he then later called the hero's journey. Now, this is not gender specific. Hero is more metaphorical, and so it could be it's a female or a male character. But all great stories and all great movies follow this circle, this timeline, three uh, three specific uh, categories of first, it's a separation from some type of normal, some type of familiar or normal. In that there is some type of call or restlessness, and usually there's a refusal of that call because of fear or something that comes up, or a desire for safety, a desire for the familiar. But nonetheless, either we one take the call and accept, as in the Matrix, we take the red pill versus the blue pill, and we go over into uh cross that chasm, and that chasm is the separation, and the separation from normal or familiar. We then go into what is called the initiation stage, or the stage of the dark night of the soul, or the belly of the whale, or the dark cave. There we are end up facing things within ourself that we may be in normal life, in the familiar, we are trying to ignore, or we try to armor up, or have our walls or guards up, or try to avoid those vulnerable areas that we try to overcompensate for. Here in the cave, in that dark night of our soul, we then have an opportunity to face our fears, which to make us then stronger, to make us to help us grow, become a better version or stronger version of ourselves. And then we take that, and the third stage is the return home, or where we take what we've learned about ourselves and then we bring that to the greater community, or we bring that to the larger outside of ourself. And so those are the typical three broad areas of first the separation from the familiar or normal, then the initiation stage where we do that work within ourselves, and then the return, or the return home, is where we take what we learned in the cave and we bring that back. One of the teachings of Campbell says is that the external characters in our life, meaning opponents, individuals that come into our life, those are external characters helping us play out our internal struggles. We will, along the way of the initiation, there will be a mentor or a coach or a guide that will come and help us, and then there will be helpers that will come along who are on the same path of their journey. It just happens to be at the same time, and they can't do the work for you, but they can be allies and that guide to help you along the way, so you're not doing it alone.
Yeah. Yeah, you did a great job summarizing it. What I love about the hero's journey and the story itself, when you exposed it to me, it was such at the perfect time because I had just quote unquote returned home to start coaching and really thinking about what my purpose was when it comes to coaching wrestling. Why I was encouraged and motivated to push kids on this path of self-actualization through the sport of wrestling. And this story basically summarized what I felt called to do, right? This idea of a season or a series of seasons then turning into a decade of consistent development, and all of the things that kind of go into that create these challenges along the way. It just made perfect sense for me to kind of like, um, it just made perfect sense for what I had been through and what I was trying to enlighten people about, and explain what they were on. And thinking about that, going into like wrestling specifics, what I love about wrestling is that out of all the things in the world, um, wrestling presents a number of challenges that force you to decide whether you are going to avoid or face obstacles. That obstacle could obviously just be a challenging practice partner of an opponent. It could be deciding if you're going to commit to a structured schedule of training. It could be the idea of how many hours are you going to spend drilling your single legs and high crotches, right? Are you going to address the nutrition and your performance and your sleep and all these things, right? Wrestling presents a number of opportunities to push people to become more than they currently are. And I love this story because it makes a lot of sense of the hero's journey. And obviously, in wrestling, the season from November to March is a vision quest, if you allow it to be, right? There's a lot of people that participate in wrestling where they're just participating. They come to practice. Maybe they try hard. Maybe they don't try hard. Maybe they go to competitions. Maybe they quit halfway through the season, and so on and so forth. But there are individuals, whether they're at the higher level chasing a state championship, or I've seen kids come in who are maybe really searching for confidence, or some form of some form of confidence, and they commit really hard to a process. And it's always been so, encouraging to see, because that's what we're kind of, as a coach, I've always thought that's my role, is to encourage people to be on this process of the hero's journey. And every year, there's always the call um, to start it all over again,
Yeah.
right? There's never a time in your life where there isn't a hero's journey at play. And yeah, so I just wanted to, I guess, get your thoughts as to wrestling specifically, and how I mean, I know you know some wrestlers. I know you are aware of the the sport itself. Um, yeah, so what are some of your thoughts on like the hero's journey as it pertains to the sport?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that, I mean, I think what I didn't know when I was competing, regardless if it was wrestling, football, track, bodybuilding, whatever it was, what I didn't know then that I clearly can see today is that sport, right, is a metaphor for life. And that when we look at through the lens at that it's really about preparing for something grander than what happens on the mat, then it all becomes, every one of those seasons all become a part of a bigger story. And if addressed and if being intentional, it could very much be preparing you for relationships with family, relationships, romantic relationships, work relationships, how you're going to be serving the community, all those different types of things. And I think that part of it, that today I'm very cognizant of. I wasn't aware, of course, at the time. It was driven about the outcome. I was more driven about how I placed in the tournament, or how I was seen by other individuals in that element. And so that's one aspect of it. And I think you know regarding this idea that Campbell's work allows us to recognize there's certain elements about wrestling that are different than other sports. Today maybe a little bit different, but when I was first introduced to wrestling, it was the only sport before bodybuilding that it was affecting. It wasn't just during practice. It I had to make sure that if I was, had to make weight, that there was that element of it. So it was the discipline not just on the mat, it was the discipline when I was at home regarding, you know, eating certain foods and not eating other types of foods. If I had to cut water or whatever it was, and this is back in the 80s, so we weren't necessarily doing things the healthiest way when we were uh, back when we were competing, but I think that all plays a part of understanding that I can't just focus on developing my strengths and ignoring, something that I'm not as good at or not as confident with, that it's really about finding that balance, that wrestling reveals those things, right? It's one of those sports where you're one-on-one. And true, at some levels, a natural athlete maybe get away with certain things, but at some point in their development, or competition, that natural athlete's gonna have a harder and harder time, so they're gonna have to
Yeah.
address those things.
Yeah, one thing as you're saying that I think wrestling has done such a good job for my own personal life is it's allowed me to criticize myself in a very honest and productive way, right? Obviously, when you're young, you're really critical and sometimes not very nice to yourself. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. I got to get better. I have to, be stronger. I have to be in better shape. I have to do this. I'm not, not accepting it. But over time, what I've realized is it's easier for me to look at my um, qualities or behaviors that aren't leading to the goals and aspirations that I have, right? There's a quote that I love is, um, if your habits don't reflect your dreams and goals, change your habits or change your dreams and goals, right? And so what it's allowed me to do is look at my goals and then look at my habits and be very critical and honest with myself about whether or not those habits are leading to my dreams and goals. And what I've seen in the rest of society with people who maybe haven't wrestled before or who haven't pursued this individual greatness in wrestling is that they choose to avoid the critical judgment of themselves because it's scary. It hurts your emotions are affected. Then you just avoid, right? And so as a therapist, counselor, addiction, working with people, all different types of suffering states, how important is it to have a good relationship with the objective criticism towards yourself in relationship to the goals and aspirations that you have with your daily habits that you're participating in?
Well, what it reminds me of, what you just were saying, that it reminded me of something that I heard recently with Dr. Jordan Peterson. He's a clinical psychologist, mostly does is a writer and teacher now, but he talked about in his one of his books. He talks about a principle for better living, and he says, "Tell the truth, or at least don't lie." And I thought that was interesting. And as he goes into explanation of what he means by that, is that if we're able to tell the truth, which is in itself hard to do because who are we to know the truth? That's a whole different issue that I want to get into. But I do know when I lie, because when I lie, I'm intentionally doing the opposite of what I see in the mirror. So when I'm not telling the truth about what the mirror's reflecting back to me, I'm compromising Kevin. And when I'm compromising Kevin, and I do that on a regular basis, trying to be something that's not in the mirror, then who am I going to rely on when shit hits the fan? What am I who am I? Because if I can't trust who's in the mirror, then how am I going to trust someone else or some other guide? And I think when I thought of when you were talking about this idea of being able to be self-assessing, right? Which at times is going to um, speak to the things that I'm not, am I giving 100%? Now, your 100% is only your 100%. It can't be compared to someone else. Now, maybe what I think is my 100%, and then the guy I'm running against or training against, maybe he's going to stretch me more. Now, maybe my level of 100% is a little bit higher than I thought it could be. So that's being able to, I think, when I think about the preparation that comes in the practice room, that's really going to determine where a person's at come the day of the match or the day of the tournament with someone from another school. It's really about what am I doing in that wrestling room? What am I doing in between practices? Am I giving 100% or am I making excuses for why I don't feel like it or wanting to do that, regardless if I tell the truth about it or not. I know, I know if I gave 100%, which is the only thing I can control anyways. I can't
Yeah.
control if I end up wrestling against a guy from another school who happens to be a monster. I can't control that. He may just be better than me on that particular day, but I can control my preparation for that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I wanted to get into with that same concept, right? So I've been talking to a lot of people about the pursuit of achievements, the pursuit of high mastery, right? To pursue excellence or elitism, right? And a lot of times, whenever I get into these conversations, it's really confusing for someone who hasn't gone through the experience because they don't recognize what they lacked maybe in their past or they currently are lacking. And oftentimes it almost sounds like it's um, condescending. And I think that it's an important area to communicate because on one hand, I truly am divorced from the outcome. I don't care other than what you're alluding to. As a coach, I just want to see someone grow and become better than they currently are and learn from the labor and the consistent practice that wrestling provides. And again, it could be something else of a practice, right? They could be bodybuilding. They could be trying to be the best football player that they could be. They could be the best basketball player. They could be the best artist. As you know, my wife is an artist and she goes through the exact same process every day towards her highest self in her art, right? So the hero's journey happens through all different activities, allowing as long as you allow for it. And the way in which you allow for it, in my view, is having a I would like to call it the audacious goal, something that is almost unreasonable to most people. And it is through that audacious goal that I believe that you become more than you currently are because you actually have to stretch yourself outside of who you currently are, right? Your average is not actually having to work. You don't actually have to be more than you currently are if you want to just be your current state, right? Your average self. But to be extraordinary or to be above average in your pursuit, you have to have um, a higher goal. You have to have something that pulls you towards that thing. And so I'm trying to communicate the importance of aspirational um, goal setting, right? Having audacious goals. And, this has always been an interesting experience because whenever I talk to people, sometimes, like whenever I'm around other coaches, oftentimes they say, make goals that are realistic. And I just always think to myself, if I made a realistic goal, I would have never got to the place that I got to.
Mhm.
A realistic goal for me, I accomplished. It's so easy. A realistic goal means that you already have what's at stake, or you already have what's needed to accomplish that thing. But an audacious goal makes you look into the mirror. It makes you question your conviction and your discipline, and um, it does everything. So I wanted to speak to you about one, the importance of that aspirational um, um, central like premise, and then um, how do you communicate it to people that you've worked with about stretching themselves to become more than they currently are, to get themselves out of their stuck state.
So, well, it's interesting when you talk about it, right? So, when somebody, coach, player, a wrestler says, I want realistic goals for this season, right? The follow-up question to that is, what is the reason why you want to settle for realistic goals? Not that we would have the answer for that, but for them to wrestle, no pun intended, with the idea of why do you want to set realistic goals? In there will be revealed why that mindset is. The hero's journey specifically talks about you can stay in the familiar by setting realistic goals. In other words, playing it safe, but no growth will come, to your point. It's kind of like saying, um, if I'm not stretched out of my comfort zone, I don't have to trust or have faith in something. It's only when I am not know where I'm at, where I'm lost, where I'm putting myself way out there, do I have to then trust in something greater than myself, a guide or something else to navigate and help me move through that? Because I don't need trust if I know what the outcome's going to be. It's kind of like knowing that I can bench, you know, 300 and let's say 315 pounds, knowing that I can do that for 6 reps, and I make sure that I never go over 325, because for the average person that looks really good, but I'm settling for a lack of growth because I'm playing it safe. And so I think, the hero's journey talks a lot about that and interestingly enough, that life doesn't allow you to stay in that comfort zone. It's a circle for a reason, right? And life will force you out of it. Now, it may be disease, it may be getting fired from a job, it may be not meeting, some other goal that you may have in a relationship or something like that. Something's going to catch up to you that's going to force you out of playing it safe. And if you're not cognizant of it, you may blame some external factor versus looking in the mirror about what part did I contribute to that. So I 100% agree with you. Scary as it is, and as hard as it is, setting those audacious goals is really how you are able to be moving toward being a champion, moving toward, and champion has nothing to do with where you stand on the podium. It has to do with how you're doing life. I, you know, when I was 17, I was fortunate enough to win the Teenage Mr. Illinois in bodybuilding. And at 18, I won the Mr. US, Teenage Mr. USA. At 19, though I was favored to win, I got sixth in the nation. And some people would probably say that sixth in the nation isn't bad. It sucks after you've won a national title. It just sucks. You know, which did I learn more from? The trophies that are underneath my basement stairs that are attached to the USA title or the Illinois title, or the ones that are not there because they didn't give out medals or trophies for not placing in the top five. They both were important because I learned valuable lessons, because in both cases I equally gave as much effort as I possibly could to the outcome. Some calculations went right in 87 when I won, and some calculations didn't go right in 88 when I didn't place. That's part of it. I think it's living within that paradox of having an audacious goal of a state or national title And at the same time, knowing that the pieces of plastic that you get, or the metal or the board that you get as a result of it, it's not worth anything more the next day. But
Yeah.
what you learn on the way, that's critical. What you learn about yourself, that's critical. So living in that paradox of giving 100% toward an audacious goal and knowing that the outcome, regardless if it's first or sixth, it it's
Yeah.
it's okay.
This actually brings me to the last point that I wanted to communicate, and it was more about. I'm glad that we didn't get to it because the second part of my last question was how do you communicate that to uh, leaders and so on and so forth. And um, that being said, as somebody who is working with people about leadership, whether it's in a corporate setting or a family setting, right? You're trying to teach leadership, right? And leadership is something that is incredibly important when it comes to guiding young people. People need to be guided, right? We are ignorant in our younger years because of our lack of experience and awareness, and consciousness is waking up, right? We're waking up as a child into adulthood. We don't know anything other than what we have to go off of, right? That being said, one thing that I struggle with is the awareness that so many people, whether it's coaches, maybe administrators, parents, they don't recognize their role as a guide to recognize or to guide and to also at the same time when you're guiding recognize that what they're after is not the the goal. What they're after is not the thing that we should all be concerned with. However, we as leaders have to like send them on that journey towards that thing, but at the same time, whether it's failure, whether it's accomplishment, it's always reminding them to consistently return to this hero's journey and become more than you currently are in the next phase, right? You win a championship, all right. Now what? Now go continue to grow. What's the next thing? What is the next opportunity for you to go through this this hero's journey again? And so, yeah, how do we, I mean, other than this podcast, which I think this is a great conversation and I love it. And so I think people will start to recognize it. Um, I think they'll start to recognize it because I think a lot of people struggle with it because of how addicting that emotional reaction is, whether it's emotionally reacting to failure, being upset, being mad, wanting something to change, or even the emotional reaction to winning of the ego and telling yourself that you're the greatest and that you're never going to lose. And then obviously we all know that there will be another thing. And I love that you mentioned when you avoid setting yourself on the hero's journey and pushing yourself, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because it's going to show up again. And the further you get away from ignoring the call to become more than you are, the shorter period of time that you have in your life to be self-actualized. So again, going back to my question, as a teacher of leaders, as a leadership development coach, how do we communicate this to the parents, to the coaches, to the adults in the room to remind them that our what our roles are?
Yeah. So I think probably the first thing that I would start, that I have to remind myself of, right? Regardless of uh, what where I'm at, is that I have to remind myself that where I'm at is not by accident. Where I'm at is exactly where I'm supposed to be right now. And what I do with it while I'm there is completely up to me, right? And so what do I mean by that specifically? Well, I know that it's critical for me to to be very cognizant that I need to continually be on the hero's journey. It is a circle for a reason. There's no end point. It continues throughout life. And as someone who wants to be the guide for guides, as a person who wants to be a guide for other warriors or heroes going on their journey, I have to do my journey continuously. So I think number one, wherever you're at, whatever your role is, right, you have an opportunity to look in the mirror and go self assess. Where am I at? How am I? What am I ignoring? What am I not doing? Am I just sitting, so to speak, on the side of the mat, barking out things because I've done my time? Or am I doing the things that I need to do to be as competitive of a leader, a coach, a guide as I possibly can be? That's going to bring not only what I'm saying, but now I'm modeling it for young people. Young people are going to, just like us as adults, young people are going to listen to what we do and what we model to them as much as what we say, probably more so how we model our behavior for them. Um, and so I think there lies the opportunity. At the same time, recognizing when somebody, regardless if it's uh, facing a struggle that the athlete is having regarding some kind of challenge that they're having, or how to handle when they have success, whichever that may be, how to guide them or coach them through that is part of our responsibility if we're in that role, I believe. Um, how to how to set up opportunities if someone, if I have an exceptional individual that's maybe more advanced than the other ones, am I setting up opportunities for that person to be with other individuals that was going to stretch them and challenge them? I remember back in the early 80s, when it came to times for sectionals or the individuals that qualified for state, a lot of Nick 10 programs practiced with each other because they didn't have the depth in their own wrestling rooms to bring the competition with each other. And they knew that they were going to have to push outside if they were going to be prepared for for the sectional and state tournament. So I think all those things of being able to see the whole picture, that's the opportunity that the adults, the coaches, the directors, the administration, the leaders all have those opportunities. But it's going to be really hard. I think it's going to be very difficult to do that if I'm not looking at myself and where I'm at on my own journey. At least for me, it's easy for me to get distracted. It's easy for me to get my ego in the way. It's easy for me to be upset about blank or blank, or get misled by some success or distracted by some setback if I'm not constantly looking at that this is a developmental process.
Yeah, which I fully, I'm 100% like, glad that you said that. That's where my thoughts are always. I think what I've been interested in as of late is more about culture building and understanding that culture is something that happens at a very small area, right? And some of the people that I follow, they call it the 20 square feet of leadership is the 20 square feet that you yourself are responsible for. And from my experience, it's so important to control that space if you really want to impact and help people um, um, do the things that you think that they're important, right? If you think that working hard is important, then you should work hard. If you think that you should continuously seek improvement, then you should personally continue to seek improvement. Um, if you think whatever it is that you think, your beliefs are going to drive the behaviors that you want to see. So your behaviors are, you know, um, are spreading through what's the word? Um, your behaviors are the things that are going to influence the most,
Yeah.
because, like you said, you, all humans are influenced by what you do, not what you say. Most people say a lot of things, and most people then go, "Well, I they're not going to follow through with it because they never do." Well, watch what somebody does, and then you'll know a lot more about somebody than what they are talking about. So yeah, I loved it. I love this podcast. I'm super grateful that you and I got to do it. We've had this podcast probably over 100 times,
Yeah.
probably. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, so just finishing up there. Again, thanks for coming on and talking about this. I think we could do it again, and I hope I get some questions or some feedback
Yeah.
from people. But other than that, do you want to, if somebody wants to contact you or follow what you're up to?
Yeah. Well, a couple things that with that, I think hopefully, right, if someone as they were listening to this and looking at either if they're a coach and they're looking at what can we do, what can they do to influence their assistants, the adults that are there, obviously you know, this is an opportunity to ask those questions and maybe we can kind of give some guidance regarding that. And then if you're an athlete and a wrestler at this particular time and looking at, what is it that they're referring to and either asking some questions, getting in contact with you or whatever that may be, that I think always is another way of continuing this conversation. If someone does, have an interest in learning more about what I'm doing, I have my own podcast called The Journey. It's based on the hero's journey. We've been doing it a little over 5 years now, and it is essentially taking different individuals and talking about their own life story and when they've had setbacks, when they've had obstacles. Not only what was the setback, but then what did they learn from that setback and then brought back home, brought back to the community. And that's called Kevin Polky, The Journey, or someone can reach out at kevinpolky.com. And then all my email and all my contact information are at either one of those locations.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Kevin, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you.